Good afternoon. On behalf of the Center for Community Progress, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. My name is Julia Zimmerman, and I serve as the Events Coordinator for National Leadership in Education here at Community Progress. Community Progress webinars equip participants with the building blocks to understand and solve tough challenges related to property vacancy, abandonment, and deterioration. For today's webinar, we are joined by Christina Carter-Grant and Joe Doolin. Christina Carter-Grant serves as the Associate Director of the National Land Bank Network at the Center for Community Progress. As the Associate Director of the network, Carter-Grant implements and grows the network's initiatives and programs, including webinars, networking opportunities, technical assistance programming, and convenings, to support America's 300+ land banks, governmental entities that acquire, maintain, and transfer vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated properties and work to create assets for neighbors and neighborhoods. Joe Doolin is the Community Development Director for the City of Peoria, Illinois. The Community Development Department is comprised of the Code Enforcement Division, the City of Peoria Land Bank, the Building Safety Division, the Planning/Zoning Division, and the Neighborhood/Grants Division. Doolin has worked for the City of Peoria for 15 years and previously held the positions of Management Analyst, Code Enforcement Manager, Assistant Community Development, and Assistant Community Development Director. Prior to working for the City of Peoria, Doolin graduated from the University of Illinois Springfield with a bachelor's degree in political studies and a master's degree in public administration. Before turning it over to our speakers, I want to mention that we will allow time at the end of the presentation to answer questions. If you have a question during the presentation, please click the Stage tab to the right of the screen, select Chat, and type your question into the chat box. We will share presentation slides and a video recording of today's presentation in the week following. If you experience any technical difficulties, please send an email to Julia Zimmerman at jzimmerman@communityprogress.org. And with that, I'll turn it over to Christina.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julia, for the introductions, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I am super excited to share with you the publication, the Residents Workbook for Dealing with Vacant Buildings and Lots. And personally, this has been a project that's been near and dear to my heart. I'll first start off with sharing a little bit about my background. I'm currently based in Charlotte, North Carolina, spent a few years in sunny Miami before moving here last year. But at the end of the day, I am a proud native Detroiter at heart, born and raised on the west side of Detroit. Whenever I think about my 20+ years that I spent in the city, I can honestly say that I love my neighborhood. I love that I had next door neighbors that always looked out for my sisters and I when we played in front of the house. I love the block parties. And I especially love the mom and pop restaurants, which, note to you all on the call, if you're ever in a room full of Detroiters, don't ask the question of what's the best Coney Island in Detroit. You'll be arguing for days. But that all goes to say that while I hold a special place in my heart for my old neighborhood, I also reflect on the feelings that I experienced growing up in my environment: stress, fear, concern. You see, my neighborhood was severely impacted by vacancy and abandonment, and this is an issue that's only grown in size in years past in my prior neighborhood. Imagine being a child scared to ride your bike past a vacant house because you knew that that particular house attracted a lot of illegal activity. Or when walking home from school, you had to cross the street, sometimes multiple times, because those scary vacant lots that dotted the neighborhood were harbors for vermin and illegal dumping. In our work, we oftentimes talk about the loss of property value, improving the quality of life, the need to create community assets. But a just as important part of the conversation are the psychological effects experienced living in communities impacted by bad properties. And that's what makes the Resident Workbook so important to me. My hope is that by using some of the guidance in the workbook, it can be used as a tool to not only educate, but inspire. And as it says on the front cover, it's meant to remind you all, the residents, that you do have the power to lead and demand change. So for those of you on the call that's not familiar with our work, our mission at Community Progress is to foster strong, equitable communities where vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated properties are transformed into assets for neighbors and neighborhoods. And while we primarily work with local governments on addressing vacancy from a systems level approach, we as an organization do recognize and value the important role residents play in neighborhood revitalization and wanted to explore how we could better support the people living in the communities that we work in. So how did we do that? We created a resident workbook. The book's main purpose is to empower and equip residents with the tools, knowledge, and resources to tackle vacancy and abandonment and lead the change that they want to see in their communities. I do want to note that the workbook is not completely comprehensive, but it is meant to serve as a starting point for residents, nonprofits, housing development organizations alike to lead the change. And a very special thank you to NeighborWorks for their support in making the workbook happen. So let's dive in to how the workbook was developed and what's all inside. So when we began shaping the workbook content, we leveraged several outlets. So first, through field research, we took a look at some of the other workbooks in the space, things ranging from repurposing vacant land to housing development. And we asked questions like, what's missing or what could be helpful for our audience? Next, and most importantly, we could not, and I emphasize, could not create this resource without first engaging the audience it was intended for, the residents. And this was done through multiple layers. So first, we held a discussion at our 2022 Reclaiming Vacant Properties Conference in Chicago, where we brought together over 50 fellows from our Community Revitalization Fellowship program, also known as CRF, which, by the way, is a really great learning opportunity for grassroots leaders to connect with one another, share ideas, visit each other's communities to learn more about the on-the-ground revitalization efforts happening in each other's communities. But going back at RVP, we had our fellows break out into several teams and discuss two questions. The first question being, what are one to two of the biggest challenges your community is facing? For example, is that vacant and abandoned homes? Is it underutilized green space? And the second question was, what are some of the obstacles blocking your community from tackling said challenges? This was also followed by a larger group discussion where we asked them to come together and report back on 3 shared areas of interest that they would like to see in a resident workbook. Following that discussion, we sent a survey to our general listserv and specifically geared it at residents and grassroots leaders. And we asked them a similar question. What are some of the biggest challenges that you found when addressing vacancy in your community? And prior to sending that survey, we first shared it with other resident leaders just to make sure that there weren't any missing critical questions and have them help us identify any important information gaps. And lastly, we facilitated a focus group with 4 NeighborWorks member organizations where we learned and discussed best resident engagement practices and asked the focus group members for their feedback on what was missing from the existing content. As you can see, we really tried to be intentional about amplifying the voice of residents and making sure that they played a pivotal role in the development of the workbook from start to finish. So the following are some of the direct quotes received from the residents via the different feedback loops. You had questions like, how do I repurpose or revitalize entire neighborhoods with the help of neighbors? Other questions asked, how do I empower residents to take part of the changes? And if you notice, there's a clear theme here, right? Resident engagement was not only necessary, but it was a main priority in building a plan to address vacancy abandonment. And this only emphasized the need for creating a resource specifically geared at residents. So now for the fun part, what's all inside? The workbook is structured to walk residents through creating an actual plan to tackle vacancy and abandonment in their community. As you can see here, we kick it off with getting involved, whether that's you're someone that's not necessarily involved yet or you're already involved. This chapter kind of touches on the different ways you can kind of get more involved in your community. The next goes into determining your strategy, followed by working with local government, finding the funding to support the initiatives, and putting it all into action. I do want to mention that though it's not listed here, we do have a pretty robust appendix section of the workbook that includes other additional helpful information such as community progress resources, national level community development resources, a glossary of terms, and a template for you to begin building your plan. And I do want to again reiterate that these are merely recommended steps, but they are there for you to provide a solid foundation for you knowing where to begin or having a starting point on where to begin. And for each of these steps, you'll find some suggested efforts. For example, step number 1 discusses how to get involved. So it provides a little bit more detail on ways that you can deepen your involvement in your neighborhood, whether that's through volunteering or joining a neighborhood group. But it also tackles the perspective of someone that might already be involved and how you can maybe pull in others to the work. For example, through finding ways to incentivize participation, like offering small amount gas cards or awards. And for the suggested efforts in each of these chapters, we organize them according to 3 levels. I'm new to this, I'm ready to do more, I'm a community champion. And each category is representative of a different launch point into using the guide, depending on where you're at in your revitalization work, and indicates the level of commitment, whether it's a lower amount of time and resources or a higher amount of time and resources. And why did we organize it this way? Well, when we did our survey, while we did find that there was a portion of people that were already actively involved in their communities, one of the biggest questions that kept coming up is, I don't know where to begin. I don't know where to start. So therefore, we wanted to create a guide that provided information ranging from those that are more entry level to more advanced and meet people where they're at in their community revitalization journey. And throughout the workbook, you'll find worksheet pages. And it was very essential for us to include worksheet style pages. So you're not just reading the book, but you have a more interactive experience, one that might require you to do some additional research or some reflection. And this is just one example of one of the many worksheets in the workbook, this one being on how to identify your local representatives. Others include forming a neighborhood group or how to conduct a windshield survey. And the blank worksheet templates were especially necessary because, as we all know, there's no one-size-fits-all community, right? So we wanted blank worksheet pages so you can populate it with information pertinent to your community. And I did at this point want to take the time to give a special shout out to one of our CRF fellows from Newark, Ms. Hassan Ali. As I mentioned earlier, we had that discussion at RVP with our other CRF fellows, and she approached me after the discussion was done and asked, hey, can you make sure that the workbook has certain style types of pages that I can complete it and make copies of it and distribute it to others in my community? So again, a special thank you to Ms. Ali for the input, and also just really helpful tip for you all to take into consideration as you're completing worksheet pages as well. So in addition to the suggested efforts, another cool workbook feature are some of the project inspirations shared throughout the workbook. This particular page is from the Determine Your Strategies chapter, and specifically under the Dealing with Vacant Lots section. Again, we really try to be intentional on when giving suggestions on projects and efforts, not only detailing what the project could be, but also sharing the level of effort it could take to get something started and maintained. This is only a snapshot of the project ideas that are out there. I highly encourage you all on the call to check out our vacant land stewardship database, as well as our creative placemaking database. My colleagues will drop the links for both of those databases in the chat, so you can see some of the other amazing revitalization projects happening across the country. And finally, one of my favorite features are the success stories. It's one thing to read about what you can do. It's another thing to see it in action, see how others have done it in their communities. So at this time, I'm happy to turn it over to Joe Doolin. He was the code encouragement story in the workbook, and he'll share a little bit more about his work, some of the amazing things happening in Peoria, and how they've engaged residents. Joe?
Thank you, Christina. Happy to be here today. Thank you for everyone who's attended, signed up. Really want to thank the Center for Community Progress and all their work, not just in this effort, but in their efforts across the country to provide technical assistance, to really bring attention to issues of code enforcement, vacant and blighted properties. One of the main things with code enforcement and vacant blighted buildings is often it's something when communities are looking at their budget and they're making decisions about what to fund and not to fund, it sometimes isn't their top priority because it doesn't quite get the attention that police, fire, public works, infrastructure, all those things get. So the more attention that can be brought to these issues that really impact neighborhoods more than anything else, and really can have the most positive impact on quality of life issues for residents is great. So thank you. A little bit about kind of myself. The bio, I've been with the city for 15 years. I'm the community development director for our department. I love Peoria. I love working with residents. I love engagement. I love improving neighborhoods. I'm just always wanted to be a public servant and really appreciate working for the city of Peoria. Next slide. So a little bit about the city of Peoria for those that aren't super aware of the city of Peoria. We're about 113,000 people located in central Illinois. We are about 48.01 square miles, about 56% owner occupied, 44% rental housing. 52,000 is our median household income, and we have a poverty rate of about 20%. Just like to get those facts out there so everyone can kind of see what kind of we're dealing with in our community. Next slide. So, often when we talk about code enforcement and community development, every city does things a little different. So, our community development department, we centralize most of our kind of community related functions. So that includes our planning and zoning, building inspections, our recently formed land bank, our neighborhoods and grants, code enforcement, and all our building inspections. So specifically looking at what we do with code enforcement, we're made up of 12 full-time code enforcement inspectors. We hire 4 additional summer temp people to help kind of with the tall grass issues. We have 2 neighborhood enhancement coordinators who focus specifically kind of on neighborhood engagement, neighborhood programming, 2 legal admin staff that helps our code enforcement with all the paperwork, one code enforcement manager. But more importantly, it really is the entire department focusing and working on code enforcement because they all touch a piece. And really, one of the things we're really lucky with in the community development department is we all really just have a goal of improving the community. So we try not to let the different divisions define who we are. Next slide. So one of the things I'm going to specifically talk about today is kind of a strategy that we've developed over the years, kind of focusing on code encouragement over code enforcement. With code enforcement, we really try education and engagement first, followed up with effective enforcement. This is incredibly important because, with social media, being a code enforcement inspector in any city across the country is one of the most difficult jobs you can do. No matter what you do, you're probably going to make someone mad, whether that's making someone mad who you're telling to cut their grass, or it's the neighborhood who just kind of sometimes takes out their frustration on you because you haven't told that person to cut their grass the quicker. It's just a very difficult job. So anything we can do to educate people to prevent code violations from happening in the first place, or engaging with residents to create more allies who will come to our defense and help get our message out as well, is a positive step in the right direction. Next slide. So just what specifically our code enforcement handles is kind of environmental property maintenance. So your tall grass, weed, litter, abandoned vehicles, exterior property maintenance, that's peeling paint, gutters, roofs, broken fences, interior property maintenance issues, electrical issues, plumbing, no hot water, things like that. Next slide. So how did this kind of framework for kind of a different strategy come about in our department? One of the things that we noticed the last 10 years, and I'm sure everyone on this call, whether you're a resident trying to be more engaged, or you work for a nonprofit, or you work for a municipality, social media can be great, but it can also make things very hard. Just takes one comment from one person to say, I was treated poorly, the city is being malicious, why isn't the city doing anything about this? And then it just kind of can be a snowballing effect of multiple people piling on. That's the bad side. The good side is that you can really get more of a story out. You can get more education out. You can get more information out. But as social media has evolved the last 10 or 15 years, we've had to evolve to kind of fit that as well. In addition, we did a national citizen survey about 10 years ago. The results were very poor, kind of for approval ratings of code enforcement. Very depressing when it's a scientific study of our community and you don't see people think very highly of the work you're doing. The good news was it was kind of where the national average is, but it still showed us that we had a lot of room to improve. I saw the value that our code enforcement team is bringing to the community. How do we tell that story? How do we engage? How do we educate so everyone sees that value that they're doing? We also had an aging workforce, so the timing was right to bring in some new hires and really change the mental perspective everyone have of our service delivery model. In addition, when you really looked at what we were doing, the field of code enforcement hasn't changed a lot over the years. It's code violation, a notice to correct. They don't correct it. You correct it. You fine them. And then you try to collect that fine. That's how a lot of communities do it. That's a very similar process, and it really hasn't evolved. So how can we kind of be more innovative, look at other things that we could do to improve that system to try to prevent them from happening in the first place? And then just to trend to fewer resources every year. Every year when we go through budget cycles with our community, there's always kind of what gets funded, what doesn't get funded, specifically when the economy is in a downturn. Everyone wants to say, public safety is very important, but they lose facts sometimes that some of the work that code enforcement or community development personnel can do, it really impacts public safety on the front end. Fire departments do a great job putting out fires. Code enforcement inspectors and building inspectors can make sure those houses are safe and fires don't happen. Police officers do a good job of solving crime, but through a lot of environmental design and making sure that neighborhoods are kept, there's a lot of pride. People are feeling comfortable being out in their community. You can prevent a lot of those crimes from happening in the first place. So to really improve our image, to make sure that when those cuts do happen, people are willing to kind of go to bat for us and support what we're doing. Next slide. I'm very lucky at the city of Peoria that we have a tremendous staff kind of from top to bottom, whether it's our code enforcement inspectors, our neighborhood enhancement coordinators, our code enforcement manager, our land bank manager. We just have a fantastic staff who's willing to kind of embrace different ideas, work to improve. So about 7 or 8 years ago, when we were trying to look for what we could do differently, we challenged the employees at the time to kind of go through what our mission statement was, go through what we're doing, and see where we have some areas to improve. So we really left it up to them if they wanted to attend and be a part of this kind of change and evolution. And about 70% of the department attended by choice. And that was a department of about 40 people. And they came up with the mission statement, striving to educate, encourage, and serve community members to create a healthier and more positive Peoria. And it's really been something we've embraced and tried to build off each year since then. Next slide. And one of those things, that we've really tried to get the message out is what do we think makes us a good code enforcement division? And what we really try to instill in all our employees and instill in the community is really we believe in our mission and we understand our goal. Our goal And the impact we can have is about life safety, public safety, maintaining property values, improving community health, community beautification, building and maintaining neighborhoods, creating safe and affordable housing, and attracting new citizens and making the community vibrant and fun. And we need to constantly be reminding the community that this is what we can contribute and bring. And part of that is working with residents to engage so they feel comfortable talking to us. Next slide. So to create that kind of encouragement and engagement, so residents do feel comfortable letting us know when there are issues or letting us know when there are problems, and creating more of the allies in the community. You know, with a staff of 12 code inspectors and 48 square miles of geography in a city, we can't be everywhere. So really, we need allies in the community who feel comfortable, who feel like we will listen to them and help take care of the issues when they raise them with us. And so that is kind of where this code encouragement and code engagement project came from, is really how do we get out more in the community? What kind of things do we have to do so citizens feel more comfortable coming to us and being part of the solution with us, and they know we're listening to them. Next slide. Next slide. Talked about that a little bit. The other thing we really try to do is interact as much as possible. You know, we go to a lot of neighborhood meetings, we volunteer at their events. So it's not necessarily people coming to our events. It's we're going to go to their events. We're going to show we support what they do. We want to show them we care and we want to be accessible. Sometimes with a code inspector who's out in the field, it's really hard to be accessible because they're going from complaint to complaint to complaint. Sometimes they just don't have the time to stop and talk to everyone because they just have so much work on their plate. So how do we create opportunities where residents can do that? Next slide. And because of that, these are kind of where these programs ideas have come from, and the fun things that not only help kind of us build better relationships in our community, but I think also really improve the morale of our staff and create a really nice team atmosphere for us. Next slide. One of the things that we really do to show citizens that we're not just being this big, bad enforcement agency, and we also appreciate all the work they do in our community, are good job door hangers. I tell a story about, we started this a few years ago, and I got a call from a resident who said, she left me a voicemail, and she said that she drove up to her house today and saw a notice on her door, and she's really upset because she thought it was from a code inspector telling her she didn't do something correct. She had lost her husband about a year before, and he really took pride in their yard. And so she tried to do so as well, but she was just very busy. And so she didn't have as much time and attention to do that. So she was very frustrated when she just saw a notice on her door, assuming the worst. But when she got up there and saw that it was just a note from the code inspector saying, good job, your yard looks great, we really appreciate your neighborhood, it really meant a lot to her. And I think that was really impactful for us to show when we do engage residents, we do reach out to them, we do show them we care. They really appreciate that as well. Next slide. The other thing we do is that, you know, when I mentioned earlier that code enforcement inspectors don't necessarily have the time every day to stop and to have conversations with everyone, we wanted to create opportunities for people to come talk to them in kind of an open house style atmosphere, so they know and could get to know their inspector that was in their area. So we have coffee with code a couple times a year, kind of an open house. We provide coffee, cookies, and just invite residents to come chat with code inspectors if they have questions, if they have concerns of what's going on in their neighborhood. Come here, talk to us, just get to know us, so really we can build that relationship. Next slide. The other thing we do is 100 blocks in 100 days. We've been doing this for about 6 years now. All the code inspectors, we canvass about 100 blocks over 100 days. Obviously can't cover an entire city, but we get out there, we knock on a door, we spend an hour, 2 hours each week while we're doing it, each inspector just introducing themselves, saying, I'm your local code enforcement inspector. If you have any issues, you have any questions, please reach out to me. So they feel comfortable if they are going to let us know about an issue. They know the processes and everything like that. It's just an opportunity to really, for us to make time to get to know them better and for them to get to know us better. Next slide. So from that conversation with that resident that I mentioned about good job door hangers, we really wanted to create something that allowed us to focus more on the good of our neighborhoods and our community. So every year, I think we're up to the 9th annual maybe, we have a Great Neighbor Appreciation Week, where we really, staff specifically spends that week focusing on making sure everyone in the community knows how much we appreciate them and we appreciate being public servants. So we do one day focused on small businesses. We do one day focused on nonprofits. We do about 3 or 4 litter cleanups throughout the week. We go to a riverfront market and just hand out information about what we're doing. It really is just an opportunity for us to tell the residents, hey, we appreciate the ability to serve you and help improve the community that you live in, that we live in, and thank you. Next slide. We also spend a lot of time on Building Safety Month, really highlighting the work of our building inspectors as well. Focus a lot on the code enforcement side of things, but building safety is also a part of code enforcement. And often with the permitting process, people are sometimes frustrated and don't understand why they have to get permits or they have to fix things. So we spend a lot of time educating people about the value that we bring. We want, when you go into a building, we want it to be safe and we want it to last for a significant amount of time. So in 40, 50 years, you're not dealing with that building being dilapidated because of poor construction quality. Next slide. Some of the other fun things we do, these just happened and they're my favorite, so I wanted to make sure to include them. City Halloween, we turned kind of City Hall in Peoria into a trick-or-treating experience, which allows the community to come and just trick-or-treat in different offices. We have a bunch of different stuff. This year we had about 300 or 400 trick-or-treaters walk through City Hall. Just an opportunity for people to get more exposed to city government, feel more comfortable with what we're doing. We also do a trash retreat, which is one of our litter cleanups we do in some neighborhoods to get some trash off the streets before kids go trick-or-treating. Staff participates, dresses up in costumes, and picks up litter. So they're 2 of my favorite things, so I always want to make sure I share those. Next slide. We do a lot of different outreach events. What we've learned is when we host events, people often don't come unless they're mad at something, and which is fine. Like if we hosted a public meeting 3 weeks before the 4th of July and said we are going to talk about illegal fireworks going off in neighborhoods, I bet we can get 100 people there. If we host a public meeting trying to promote one of our housing programs where you can get discounts off of your electric bill, we'll probably get 5 to 10 people there. So really the best way that we can interact with people is really going to events that are already being hosted and go and meet people where they are, whether that's a riverfront market, a nonprofit organization that sees a lot of people coming through their door every day. That is the best way that we can do that outreach to make sure people are more comfortable with us. Next slide. And these are just kind of some of the events that we do on a yearly basis to make sure we have kind of information available and so people feel comfortable talking to us. Next slide. This is something we've done the last 3 or 4 years that staff really appreciates, and so do the neighborhoods. One day every other week, about 30 or 40 of the community development department go out and just pick up litter. It's a really good bonding experience, I think, for our department. And it also provides a really good opportunity for residents to see that not only are we telling people what they need to do, but we're also willing to do that work ourselves. And so it's something that, we pick up a lot of litter off the streets. It's funny because sometimes you post these and you get negative feedback on social media. Well, if people just didn't litter, we wouldn't have this issue. And that's true. But my response is usually great. But if we don't pick up the litter, who's going to? And so if we all took the time to just do that, think how much litter we could pick up throughout the community. Next slide. We've also focused a lot on the educational materials that we present to residents that try to make them pretty simple and understandable with a lot of information. We used to kind of, the evolution of kind of our flyers has gone to more information, less information, point to people to websites. Really where we landed is these postcards are kind of the simplest way to get information out to people. They're not huge, so they don't take up a lot of space. If someone wants to put some of the information on a fridge, we try to put information on there that someone would want to keep with some additional information that would help them. So information on how to report code violations is something someone wants to keep. So we try to kind of make sure our educational materials are simple and something someone would want to keep and not just throw away. Next slide. The last thing is we really tried to push this brand of appreciating Peoria, trying to just make sure that positive message of what we're doing. You know, we love being public servants. We want people to love in our community. So for anyone on the call, if you have Instagram, follow us at Appreciate Peoria. We highlight a lot of the programs we do. We highlight the work of staff. Coming up in the Christmas time, we do kind of a 12 days of appreciation where we highlight 12 different things around the community that we appreciate. And so that's kind of our tagline that we as a department try to get out there and try to really emphasize that we just want residents to appreciate the community they live in. We're not perfect. We make mistakes. We always have the opportunity to improve, and we want that impact. But the main thing is for them to interact with us. And so we know what they want and how we can help them. Next slide. So that's the end of my presentation, but just kind of closing and wrapping things up with, you know, kind of what Christina said earlier about the residents' workbook and the work they put into that. You know, I spent quite a bit of time of going through it after it was published, and the information there is fantastic and tremendous. And, you know, we often we'll be using a lot of that information when we're talking to our residents about things that will make them feel more engaged in a community. It's a great thing for neighborhood associations to take to welcome new members to their neighborhood, where they can customize some of that information with things common in their area as a welcome to the community. You know, being a city employee specifically in code enforcement is incredibly hard. It's hard that for the staff every day to see kind of bad conditions landlords creates, or sometimes having to do code enforcement on people that can't afford to keep up their property. And so it's a very tough thing. So the more information that we can provide to residents, the more connections we can make to the nonprofits in our community, the more tools and resources that we can give our staff. So when a resident needs help, we can be able to share that help. But the main thing for us to improve what we're doing is trying to get residents engaged and get that feedback from them. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Christina.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joe, for that. I'm going to take a little bit of time to look through some of the questions that we've had come in thus far. In the interim, if you haven't submitted a question and you would like to do so, please be sure that you are clicking the stage tab on the right side of your screen, selecting chat, and typing your question into the chat box. So we'll start with the first one, or one of the ones that came in. And it says, have you gotten a good number of people to sign up for the Peoria Cares app?
Yeah. It's probably, we get about 80% of the complaints. So the way that we work in code enforcement is, you know, we obviously respond to complaints, but we're also pretty proactive in canvassing our geographical areas. But about 80% of the complaints we come through the app. But really the app is great, but it can't be the only thing you focus on. There's a lot of people who don't have the ability to have Wi-Fi, or they don't have a cell phone that they can use to report things. So you need a multitude of other efforts to really engage with residents to find out what their concerns are and what the problems are. So the app is great. We've had a lot of luck pushing that to a lot of people who can use it. Fortunately, a lot of people do have smartphones, so it's an easy way for them to be able to drive around, take a picture, let us know where things are. But I would just caution anyone to looking to rely on that super heavily, is that you're going to alienate a lot of people who just don't have that ability to use an app. So make sure you have a multitude of different ways for people to report issues or engage with you.
Thanks, Joe. I did have a question on my end. So in our workbook, and specifically in the working with local government section, we talk about ways that local government officials could improve communication, transparency, and accessibility. So a lot of your programs are centered around accessibility, right? Like the Coffee with Code program. Why do you think that those types of programs are important for strengthening resident engagement?
Yeah, so I have the luxury that I work with our code enforcement staff all the time. I know how much work they're doing. I know how much value they bring. So it really hurts my heart when I see negative feedback or I see critique of all the work they're doing, because I know how much they care and how much they love the city. And I know how great a job they do. Part of what I believe is when they do get that when that negative feedback does occur, it's a lack of education about why we do what we do. We're just not out there telling people to cut their grass because we hate tall grass. We tell you to cut your grass because it really does help the look and the care of the neighborhood. It prevents rodents, it prevents bugs. And so, those are the reasons when those events are so important, because we can put the residents can see a face of who's telling them and who's protecting their neighborhood. And so I just think it adds a huge element of kind of familiarity between the bureaucratic work that they see and the actual person that's doing it. And then really for the protection of our employees, if you get to know them, it's much harder to be mad at them for something because they are such good people who care about the community they work in. They look like the community they work in. They reflect their lifetime Peorians as well. They care about being a public servant. So the more interaction they have with residents, it also helps them. It's much harder to be mad at someone versus just an anonymous person who might write a note on your door that says, "Hey, could you pick up your litter?"
Also understandable. And also kind of going back to the transparency aspect. Can you share a little bit more about how Peoria's code enforcement department has ensured transparency in like your decision-making processes, specifically those that impact the community?
Yeah, I mean, I think that really the thing that a code enforcement department can do to be most transparent is making sure that all the processes that you do and the programs you have are being shared publicly. We want to educate people as much as possible about what happens when you have a code enforcement violation. And that's really our first step when you do have a code enforcement violation, is educating you on what happens, what the process is, what the code says. If you can follow that, that prevents a lot of those issues of you're treating this neighborhood differently than this neighborhood. You're treating this person differently than this person. If you outline what those processes are, you can be very transparent of why you're doing what you're doing. So you're not pitting one neighborhood against another. You're not focusing here versus there. And then the other thing is just, the more and more we go out and meet residents, the more and more we're willing to take that criticism and that feedback back and improve what we're doing. I think it's much easier, for someone just to say, well, this is the way we do it. It really doesn't, ruffle any feathers. So we're just going to keep doing it the way we're doing it. But then what that leads to is not innovating, not finding new solutions, not seeing what you can do. One of the things that kind of unrelated to code enforcement, but in the community development realm that really we evolved based on more engagement that we've heard is we just recently launched a new program specifically focused on our coordinated intake list of individuals experiencing homelessness. Because one of the feedbacks that we were hearing from our nonprofit providers in our community, even those experiencing homelessness, is the way the system is designed is that the nonprofits really have to focus everyone on the top of the list who are the hardest to house. Mm-hmm. So there's easy wins towards the bottom of the list, the people who just need a little help. They don't need as much case management. They just need maybe $1,000 for a security deposit because they have an income, but because they can't save for that security deposit, they're homeless. But without working with nonprofits, without engaging residents, without talking to people on the list and going through that issue, we would have never come to create a program like that can evolve into something where we can make a substantial progress in homelessness in our community by really spending much smaller amounts than if we're just focusing on the ones that sometimes need the more substantial case management.
Thank you for that, Joe. And we're just again, a reminder, if you have other questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. Looks like there's one on, let's go to the question from Alvi. Okay, so how can we encourage our elected officials to organize wide-range neighborhood cleanup and trash pickup events? My city is filled with litter and trash throughout its roadways, parking lots, and neighborhoods. Alvi, totally understand the frustration with that. And it just makes me think back. There's no perfect answer to this question, but it just makes me think back to when I was thinking about like, what picture do I want this to market this webinar? And it's people power, because at the end of the day, a lot of this comes back to people power. In the book, we have as I mentioned, the identifying your local representatives worksheet, where you can add information like who represents your community, what are numbers that you can use to report issues with trash and dumping, etc. I think for me, the important part is to galvanize other residents. It's one thing if you have you being the one person that's reporting it. It's another thing to come together as a community and all report it. Like, just hold people accountable. So a really great question. I did want to ask Joe, did you have any input on that before I look at some of the other questions coming in?
Yeah, it's this is really funny, what you just said, because when I did read the workbook as a practitioner, I did cringe a little about sometimes. I hope whatever community that everyone is listening is in, that isn't what it takes to get things done. It shouldn't be 100 voices means we're going to focus. But sometimes it does take that. But what I would encourage everyone listening is there's probably a me in every city that you're working for. Reach out, call them, say, I have these ideas. Give them an opportunity to try to implement some of these programs to fix the issue. We get feedback sometimes of like, well, that house has been vacant. No one's ever done anything. Well, I look in the system and there's no complaints. There's no issues. There's nothing. No one's ever reached out and said something about it. So really take the opportunity to speak up. And I think by speaking up and reaching out directly to the staff that are doing it, you give them the opportunity to make changes. I think Christina's advice is fantastic once you try to give someone an opportunity and they don't do that. Because at the end of the day, that is impactful when you have 10, 15, 20 people all focused around the same issue. And then specifically around the question about litter cleanups, you live in your neighborhood. I would encourage you to ask people to come help you pick up litter. Post something on Facebook, post something on Nextdoor, invite people to your neighborhood. That helps twofold. People see the community you live in, see how great it is, see how much you all care. It can attract new vibrancy to an area, attract new residents who want to live in that area with people that care. And then you get exercise by just picking up litter. And then by removing the litter, it's great for the community as well. So, invite staff to do that. Invite, the fire department always likes a great publicity. Invite the local fire department to come out and take a look, and I'm sure they'll help you. I mean, there's a lot of people, if you make that invitation, you invite them to come do what you want to help with, they're willing to do it. Just sometimes you have to take more initiative, and they're probably willing to do that.
Exactly. This is an interesting question, Joe. It says, really diverse array of community outreach, informational, and participatory engagement. Well done. Has this departmental change improved the citizen approval rating?
So we haven't done a citizen survey recently. I'm not sure if it will. I think that there's a lot of factors that will factor into that. I think that when we last did the survey, I think a general view of government has gone down based on national issues. So I would be a little nervous that there might be a correlation between that. But what I will say is we have seen more allies increased of those that defend us when people criticize the work we're doing. We've seen a lot less incidences where people will post things on social media and get more traction than it has in the past. So, we can show how many neighborhood leaders we have, how many people we've interacted with. The problem with sometimes surveys of communities is a lot of other factors go in. So I hope yes is the answer. And I think it will because of the work they're doing. But I can say for a fact that we don't get the complaints like we used to about kind of how we do our business. We don't get as many social media issues as we've had in the past, people calling local media stations. I get nothing but positive feedback from neighborhood and community leaders where the inspectors are. So anecdotally, it works really, really well.
Awesome.
I'll let you all know though the next time.
Yes, please keep us posted. Okay, so we have a couple other questions here. It's okay, so this is from Alexandra Little. It's the maintenance of trees on the tree lawns and the tree lawns themselves, the responsibility of the property owner or the city.
Yeah, so this is what is kind of hard about code enforcement is every city and community that you live in has different rules and regulations. So I think, as the resident workbook kind of outlines, it's really important to know what those code and ordinances and rules are in your community. In the city of Peoria specifically, the maintenance of trees are a really hard thing we deal with because we don't employ 15 arborists who tell me how dangerous trees are. And then, unfortunately, trees are kind of a big equity issue as well. I mean, a tree can cost $2,000 or $3,000 to remove. A $2,000 or $3,000 expense for someone who's living paycheck to paycheck is really, really hard. Mm-hmm. So sometimes we do work orders to remove dead trees. If we think they're a public safety hazard, we can work out payment plans. But really, you just need to take some time to really go to your city website, see what codes they're doing, reach out to the code enforcement officials and ask that question and see what kind of feedback they give you.
Thank you, Joe. Let's see. Okay, we have a question here from a Doug Victor. Speaking of lawns and yards, what is your understanding of the place for rerouting these spaces?
I feel like that's a loaded question. It's hard because I understand the value that kind of natural grasses can bring for CSO issues, for wildlife, for improving communities. I think what I would say specifically to this issue is if a community is going to explore this, don't use it as a way to address vacant property. Use it if the neighborhood and community that it's in want to use it for those other benefits, then do it. But just specifically looking as a community to cut cost on vacant property because you don't have to cut it as often and you don't have to maintain it, can create large equity issues. Because would that program still be applicable in neighborhoods that don't have as much vacancy, who might not tolerate wild natural grasses or bugs as much as another would? So I would just be very careful with this. I think there's a lot of benefits to kind of that concept, but make sure the neighborhood is they want it and they support it.
Thanks, Joe. And I'll just end with the final question, easy question. Do you have any other future initiatives? You already have a ton where you're engaging residents. Do you have any of the other ones on the docket?
So we are always thinking about new programs and new things we can do. We don't have a lot new planned. This is a really weird time for city government. There is a lot of grant money out there between the American Rescue Plan money and some state money. So we've launched a lot of new programs the last year or two with direct citizen services around housing rehab stuff. So with the current kind of stuff we have, we're kind of moving forward. One thing we are going to start kind of next year is kind of more engagement with some of our nonprofit community of inviting them to come in 2 or 3 a month and talk to staff specifically who are out in the field every day so they know how to connect with those services. Mm-hmm. So we'll continue to evolve. I don't have anything kind of new planned yet, but I think some of my staff are on this call and what they will tell you is often we come up with new ideas and then I have no patience at all. So I'm like, okay, let's do this in 2 weeks. Drive them nuts sometimes, but it also makes a fun place, I hope.
Awesome. Well, Joe, thank you so very much for sharing your expertise with our audience. I really appreciate it. You sharing your story in the workbook itself. I'm loving reading through the comments. I see people have already used it in a meeting with community residents. People have already made copies of that. Love to hear that. I did want to again, remind you all on the call that you can download your copy either by scanning the QR code that you see on the screen. My colleagues will also drop a link to the download in the chat. And if you have any other questions that may not have gotten addressed on the live, please feel free to reach out to me directly. And the post-webinar follow-up email will also share Joe's contact information in case you have any questions for him on some of the work that he's doing in Peoria. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Julia.
Hi, thanks so much. This was an amazing webinar. Thank you again to Joe and Christina. Like Christina said, we'll be sharing a recording, presentation slides, any additional resources we shared in the chat, and a follow-up email within the next week. My colleague Crystal has dropped a note with a survey about your experience in the webinar today, and we'll also include that in the follow-up email as well. But if you can take a second to fill that out, we'd really appreciate it. That's all from us. We'll see you in community progress webinars in 2024. Thanks so much.
Bye.